Did you ever wonder what goes into creating and manufacturing lighting gear that you use? This week, I have a sit down with an entrepreneur and a creator of really cool light, Mr. Udi Tirosh of Spiffy Gear. Stay tuned.
You're watching TOGCHAT Live, the only live show dedicated to the hows and whys behind creating consistently great photographs. Here's your host, Joe Edelman.
Hey, gang, welcome to episode number 236 of TOGCHAT. I do hope that you're all healthy and, of course, still wearing your masks, practicing your social distancing. You know the drill. Check in, leave a comment, let me know you're here and where you are in the world. Already, who do we got here? We got Lynn checking in from upstate New York, Nick in Brooklyn, New York. We got Gabe in Miami. I got Ken in Cheshire, Mitch in Northern Ireland, David in San Diego, Eric down in San Antonio, Alvin in Virginia, and Robert just woke up, so I'm not sure where he's from. And there's Joe from Michigan. Thank you all so much for being here, gang. You are all a part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who tune into or watch or listen to TalkChat every week. And for that, I'm going to work really hard to help you with your photography in the next 60 minutes. And it would help a lot more people find out about TalkChat if you could do me a solid. Hit that thumbs up right down there below the video. There, I see those little yellow thumbs popping up on my screen. You guys are awesome. While you're down there, feel free. Hit that share link. The more people that know about it, the more people that show up, and the more people that YouTube puts it in front of. You can share the link togchat.chat/live. I just dropped it in the chat window for you. Of course, Twitter, Facebook, they're the fastest way to get the word out. And if you're a member of any photography clubs or groups, please let them know about TalkChat. Don't keep it all to yourself. Hey, and remember TalkChat, it's available for download as a podcast every week. I'm going to share the link for you in the chat window so that you have it. It goes live early tonight because I'm doing a presentation for Sacramento, California when I get off air. So the podcast is going to go live at 8 p.m. And it's a great way to get your weekly fix while you're editing or retouching. Each episode of the podcast includes content that you aren't seeing here on YouTube. So don't miss out. In fact, I'll explain some of the differences tonight because there's some changes. The show's available on iTunes, Google, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and pretty much anywhere that you like to get your podcast fixed. And TalkChat is moving up the charts. We're now in the top 80 of all visual arts podcasts on the Apple charts. So I appreciate your support. Again, it's going to go live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. tonight. Hope you'll check it out.
Next up is a TOGCHAT exclusive interview.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those nerdy people who wonders how things come to be. I mean, come on. Haven't you ever purchased a piece of gear or used a piece of gear to create something cool and then wondered, how did they come up with this? Or better yet, who came up with this? I've been fortunate over the years to have met some of the entrepreneurs and engineers behind various pieces of camera gear and accessories. So I thought it might be fun to sit down with one of them and learn a little bit about what goes into bringing gear to market. My guest today is educated as an engineer. He is a photographer and a serial entrepreneur, and he is the owner and creative genius behind Spiffy Gear, which is the company that brings us the Light Blaster, the Specular lights like you see back there, and the flexible KYU6 or Q6 lights. His name is Udi Tirosh. Udi's based in Tel Aviv, Israel, but he's a world traveler. He can be found in attendance at most of the major photography trade shows, even the ones here in the U.S., when, of course, we're not in the middle of a pandemic. Now, full disclosure, I am an ambassador for Spiffy Gear, which simply means I get to try out their gear before the general public does. But you've seen me use Spiffy Gear lighting frequently on a lot of my YouTube videos. The Specular lights, of course, are part of my background here on YouTube every week. The Q6 lights I used all throughout the Stuck at Home Challenge back at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm not being paid to have Udi on as a guest. I'm not paid to be an ambassador for Spiffy Gear. I am just simply a huge fan of their gear. So let's go ahead. Let's get right into it. Udi, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me on TOGCHAT. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me, Joe.
It's great to have you here, and this is going to be a little bit different because usually I'm talking to people about how they do their photography. So this is a fun chance to kind of go behind the scenes a little bit and learn a little bit more about lighting and how it all comes together. But that being said, if you could do me a favor for my audience that may not be aware of you or aware of Spiffy Gear, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what we should know.
So my name is Udi Tirosh. You should know that, Joe. Now your community knows that too. I'm a photographer at first, but what I'm doing right now is I'm making gear. So I own a brand called Spiffy Gear, and we're making lighting. Well, we call it, we're making lighting for storytellers. And that goes either mostly to videographers and to photographers. And, aside from that, I'm a dad. I have a wife, I have a family, I'm a traveler, I'm a relentless entrepreneur. But I think that for the sake of this podcast, we'll take the gear manufacturer angle.
And that's the part that I am most fascinated to learn about. So I have to ask, just out of curiosity to begin with, I went to your LinkedIn page. I know that you have a degree in software engineering and, well, actually computer science and mass media. So how do you get from there to designing some really, really cool lighting products?
So this is actually a wonderful question, Joe. Thanks for asking it. When I went to college, I thought that what I want to, as a grown-up, what I want to do is deal with computers. So I went ahead and learned computer science, but I also wanted, a little bit for the soul. So I also enrolled for mass media studies. And as it turned out, I spent a lot of time doing computer software and computer hardware. But surprisingly, every now and then, that little bit of education about mass media and gender and sociology, they always crawl back in, even when you're a software engineer. And I started shooting. So I was, I was just like Peter Parker. I was your friendly neighborhood photographer. So I was doing maternity shots, portraits, a little bit of business shoots. And I was very involved with the photography community, either with the local community and also, the internet just started happening. So forums popped up. We had Flickr. We had, I don't know if you remember EarthView or LensView, something like that, EarthTrack or LensTrack, something like that. So I was very active on all those platforms. And I started seeing needs, stuff that people want, but is not necessarily available. And I started seeing people doing this projection thing where they took an old slide projector and they started, and they were doing incredible stuff with it. Mostly scenery or roads on nude. Sometimes they'd use it as a background. I thought, man, this is cool. If there was only a product like this, but for photographers. And, I went ahead and created the Light Blaster. And that was my first product as Spiffy Gear. And, we sold thousands and thousands and thousands of units. Are you familiar with it? Do you know what it is, or do you want to?
I'm absolutely familiar with it. In fact, I've done videos about it. I think it's great because I was one of those people that was using a projector, and using a projector was a nightmare. So the Light Blaster was awesome.
So let me show you just a little bit how it works. So this is basically the Light Blaster, and it's a plastic body. It has a bayonet that fits a Canon lens. So your lens, whichever lens you want. So, it can be a Canon, you can use an adapter for Nikon, and it goes here. And this is basically a projector. The only thing that's missing is a source of light. So for that, you have a strobe. This is Lumo Pro. I don't know if you guys remember that brand. It was from Ampex. They created their own flash. It had 4 ways of triggering. That was the thing with the flash, and that goes here and acts as the light source. And right here in the middle, you can put a slide. So you can put a slide, and that projects onto whatever you want. So I've seen people use it for putting things on their models. I've seen people use it for architecture. I've seen people use it as backdrops. And I think the most wonderful thing that I've seen, when we launched this, we made a short, funny video about a guy who's proposing to his girlfriend by, giving a stranger the camera. He shot them in the park, and on the building behind, the light blaster showed a "Marry Me" sign or a "Marry Me" projection. And, we launched the product, and a year and a half later, I got a very exciting email say, hey guys, for Spiffy Gear, you wouldn't believe this. I just proposed to my girlfriend using the light blaster. And he was a photographer, and he took her to his studio. He told her, hey, take a picture of me. Or actually, he took a picture of her. And when they looked at the LCD, it said, marry me. And, she looks back. It's not there. It was only on the LCD. So I think this is the most wonderful use that I've seen for the light blaster. But as I've said, it's good for photography, and it's good for your models, your backgrounds, your architecture, and that was our first product.
That's very cool. So, I mean, it's one of those products that once you see it and you understand it, it kind of seems really obvious in terms of its benefits. How much goes into creating something like that? And the reason I ask this, I mean, obviously as a photographer and a consumer of photography products, we find new products. They're good, they're bad. We like them, we buy them, but we never really think about what does it take to actually bring that to market. And I've heard some of your stories with the production side of things, the trials and tribulations, which I'll let you share. But really kind of just, I've got an idea. How do I turn that into something?
Usually this is not where it starts. It doesn't start, you don't come and like, poof, I have an idea. So usually there's a need. And, me being a photographer, I sometimes stumble across things that I want to do and I can't. And the light blaster was one of them. So, now they're like micro projectors and stuff, and they're very powerful. But the light blaster is like 8 or 9 years old. And back then, the only way to do projections was to take a projector or and it had a flash on one side, and it had like you literally stick, like you force fit a lens into the other side. And some of my friends saw that and said, hey, this is amazing. And I was like, yeah, let's productize this. So this is usually how a product comes to be. I'll talk a little bit about Specular and about Q6 in a minute, but this is how usually where the product starts. You find a need, you find something that you want to do and no one else answers it. And, you say, what can I do to make this happen? And, you start, sometimes you do a little model for yourself. You just make sure that things are working. Then usually I work with an industrial engineer. We have Natalie. She's our industrial engineer. She sits right there. She's a super talented lady. And usually I come to her with a vision, and, maybe with a very rough sketch or a whiteboard sketch, and she starts thinking, she understands the problem. And a lot of the time, my initial sketches are very far from what she ends up with. But, she understands my idea and the problem that I'm trying to solve, and, the general way or the general direction where I want to solve it. Then we make a real prototype using a service. And today we have a bunch of 3D printers over there. So we 3D print the thing and we make sure that it works. Once we verify that's usually called a functional prototype or a proof of concept. Once we have that, so we go out and source the parts. A lot of them are not off the shelf, almost all of them are not off the shelf parts. So there's a stage called tooling. And that stage, they actually create a mold. And a mold is a big thing. So the mold for the light blaster is roughly, that big. And there are a couple of them. And those molds, they're called injection molds. They create the plastic. And there are, several molds for several types of things that you want to do. And that phase takes about a month and a half. And it's a very scary phase because it costs a lot of money. And once it's done, it's very hard to make changes. So you want to make absolutely sure that you have it right. So you go through prototype after prototype after prototype. Then when you think you've nailed it, you go out and create the tools, and then you go into mass production. So this is roughly the the industrial storyboard of a product.
You begin Spiffy Gear with the Light Blaster,
Yep.
which is designed to work with strobes. But of course, your follow-up products have been these incredible LED lights, which I want to let you talk about. But
I,
my question is, which you may have already answered, how did you get from the Light Blaster to Specular, which was your follow-up? What was the need or what was the problem that you were solving
Mhm.
with Specular? I'm curious about what the catalyst was that got you to that
Yeah.
light.
So I see we're both wearing our stars in the background, and those are actually speculars. But surprisingly, Specular did not start out as a star. So what I've only had, I think I can call it a fetish with ring lights. So I'm a big fan of ring lights. I love the look, I love the fashion, I love the light signature. And in another life, I've made like cardboard ring lights. So I'm a big fan of ring lights. If you remember David Hobby and the strobist movement, they had a thing about ring light, and that really got me hooked. And Specular came to be about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and we started thinking about Specular maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So ring lights were not a thing there. Now you can go into like your local, I don't know, you can probably buy ring lights at your local 7-Eleven, like they're that common. But when we started, ring lights were either strobe based and they were big and bulky, or they were fluorescent based and needed electricity and were very fragile. And when I started looking into this, I was like, I want a ring flash that I can take out, that I can go out into the field with. And just, a new technology crept and came in, and that was LEDs. But LEDs were either, again, this is not how it is today, but back then LEDs were either green or purple, or, pick a color, magenta. You pick a color, you had LEDs for it. And when we started working on Specular, we wanted to make a ring light which is sturdy, you can take it outside, and it has good color accuracy. And we went through a long process of finding our LED manufacturer. I actually remember you did a big thing about CRI when you tested Specular. I remember that's. I don't want to toot your own horn, but if you haven't seen Joe's thing about CRI, you should definitely go and check it out. But anyways, we started making a ring flash, and I wanted it big, so I wanted like a big, nice ring flash. And I thought that the only way to do this is to make a ring flash that collapses or folds, or you can take it apart. And then we came up with this concept that you have sections and you have hinges, and you can connect them together all the way until you complete a circle. And that's not actually a circle, it's an octagon, but close enough. And by the time we were finished with that, we realized, hey, what if we don't make those hinges? What if we don't make them parts? What if we make them hinges? And then we added the ability for them to change angle. And, then we made this, which is the star bed that you see behind me and behind you. And a lot of other features kept creeping in. And by the time that we were done, we had like the Lego system of LEDs. And when we went out, Speculars or CRI 95, when we went out, CRI 95 was not a thing yet. So most LEDs were, 80, 75, and we were really up there with the quality of light. And we were very warmly embraced. I know you have a set or two if you have a star. And yeah, this is how we went from like ring light to this Lego system.
And that's one of the things I really love about them, because for me, I use them kind of really to create specialty lights that I'm oftentimes including in my shot or doing it to create certain reflections. So there's two things that come from that. One, I just want to point out to people that are watching and listening, Spiffy Gear has a Facebook group, and Udi is talking about the configurability of these lights. One of the things, if you join the Facebook group and you kind of scroll through the pages, you will see some amazingly brilliant configurations and solutions that photographers and cinematographers around the world have come up with, using the Specular gears. So it is, for me, a piece of lighting that really adds to your creative suitcase in the sense that if you can think of a way that you want to create a shape of light or create something that's going to even add a certain flavor to your scene by including it, Specular is a great tool. But that being said, getting to the CRI thing, indeed, when I did the video about specular lights, I went out and I did a lot of research because I was aware of CRI. And admittedly, when I say aware, it's like I had heard of it and I had this very basic idea. And I thought, well, maybe it's time because more and more people were talking about CRI. And at that point in time, it was being talked about in a way that I think scared a lot of people because there wasn't a lot of information about it. And it was this whole new thing. And so even for me as a photographer who'd been shooting for so many decades, suddenly it's like, wait a minute, I understand color temperature. Now you're telling me I've got to learn this whole other metric for my lighting. So I guess what I'd like to hear from you, from somebody who has designed it, who I know has obviously had to dig really deep into CRI and understanding it. If you can give me just an overview for the people that haven't seen that video of what CRI is, but better yet, I'd like to hear it from a designer's standpoint. Why is it so important to pay attention to CRI?
So I'm going to make this really simple for your community. And I'm going to go into all the things that you've asked. But before that, I'm going to say that if a light does not specify the CRI, it is not a good light for you. And if a light has a CRI of 85 plus, it is probably good enough for most people. If you want to be super picky and you're, a color freak, then go with 95 plus. But for most uses, 85 is okay. So no CRI under 85, don't take it. 85 plus, it's okay. 95, you're in a good spot. But now that we know what you need to look for on the box, there are always Joe, you remember I had the Canon A65. There was a huge number, 3.2 megapixel on the box and on the camera. So there is always one number the industry highlights. It was, back then it was the number of megapixels. Maybe today's the high ISO or dynamic range. And for lighting, this number is now CRI. So the higher your CRI, the more accurate is your light. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So what happens when you take an apple and you look at it, let's say you're outside in the sun or in a cloudy day and you look at an apple. That apple has, maybe it's, one of those Snow White apples. It is, incredibly red. It's so vivid with color. This is because the sun or the light that is coming from the sky has a CRI of almost 100. So for all intents and purposes, this is a CRI of 100. This is the highest CRI you can get. And that means that all the wavelengths that are in the light that are all the wavelengths that are available are represented in that light. So you probably know that experiment. Maybe you've done it as a kid. You take a ray of light and you put it through a prism, and it breaks into a rainbow. And that is to tell us that the white light is not actually white. It is a mix of all the other colors. So that's what happens when you go outside. The light looks white, but in reality, it's not white. It's just, a very tight mix of every other light, of all the wavelengths. And high CRI means that you have all those wavelengths together. Now, let's look what happens when you lower the CRI. So let's assume that you have a really horrible light with a CRI of 60. That means that some of the wavelengths are just not present in that light. Usually, this is the red. And this is why bad LEDs tend to go green, because they don't have the red color in them. So let's take that same apple and look at it under a low CRI light. You want it to be red, but there is no red in the white light that's hitting it. So it comes back less red. Maybe it comes back greenish. And when you're looking at it with your eyes, your brains know that it's a red apple. So your brains kind of compensates and says, hey, this is an apple. I know it should be red. It's red. But, the camera doesn't have your brains. So when the camera looks at it, it sees the actual light that is being reflected from that apple. And if there is no red hitting that apple, there is no red coming back into the camera. So that apple will look greenish. And when you look at the picture, you will see that. It's very hard to fix bad CRI in post-production because this is just sort of like, tweaking levels. It's bringing back something that is not present back into the picture. So if little red was hitting the apple, little red got into the sensor. Now you, as the creative person who took the picture, has to kind of guesstimate how much red you have to bring in back to the picture to make it accurate. So low CRI is a nightmare to deal with for photographers. If you're a videographer, if you're a photographer, you're taking one shot, you can spend a lot of time fine-tuning every bit of every pixel of the image to make it perfect. If you're doing this for video, you have 30 frames a second that you need to fix. This is just impossible. So if you're doing video, high CRI is super critical for you.
That's actually, I just learned something. So that's awesome because I understood, the CRI impacting the relationships of colors in the scene. I was not aware that essentially sunlight would be kind of 100 CRI. In other words, that purest mix of all the lights. So that's awesome. And I think I'm pretty sure on the correlation here, but I'm going to ask you to explain that one step further. So CRI, we're talking about relationships of colors because of colors missing from the light. But just to clarify it for my audience, how is all of that differing from worrying about the color temperature in a scene? And that's where I'm going to leave you hanging because I really want you to hear the entire interview. Udi does some great breakdowns about understanding the importance not only of CRI, which, as Marcelino reminded us, is color rendering index, but also how it relates to color temperature. He also gives us some great examples, really makes it easy to understand. So as I mentioned earlier, the podcast goes live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share the link with you one more time in the chat window. You can find it at TOGCHAT.com. You can find it at TOG.chat. Any one of those will work. Also, please note if you've been watching intently and not paying attention to the chat, scroll up in the chat window a little bit. Udi was kind enough to give me a discount code. The code is very simply TOGCHAT. If you purchase anything, if there's something you've been looking to get during TOGCHAT tonight, you get a 20% discount. After that, that discount will stay live at 10% for the remainder of the following week until next Wednesday's show. Okay?
It's time for this week's photo quote and featured photographer.
If you try to get famous, you won't. But if you don't care, you probably will. You've got to stick to your guns too, because once you back down, you're finished. This week's photo quote is credited to David Bailey. In my opinion, this quote is so ahead of its time and incredibly appropriate in today's social media world. Most importantly, I feel that it speaks to the idea that a creative has to be willing to live and die by their creative choices. You can only do your best work if you do your work and not try to paint inside the lines provided by rules or other people's opinions of what your work should be. David Bailey is an English fashion and portrait photographer born in 1939. He is still alive and kicking. Bailey became a fashion rock star in the 1960s. He began shooting for British Vogue. He was shooting covers for them within a few months. And at the height of his productivity, he shot 800 pages of Vogue editorial content in 1 year. It's extreme. He's considered to be, honestly, one of the pioneers of contemporary photography. David Bailey is credited with photographing some of the most compelling images of the last 5 decades. He first rose to fame making stars of a new generation of models long before the 1980s supermodels, people like Jean Shrimpton and Penelope Tree. Since then, his work has never failed to impress and inspire critics and admirers. capturing iconic images of legends like the Rolling Stones or Kate Moss. He's known for using stark black and white backgrounds, closely cropped shots, and sharp lighting. And all of that led to a new era of fashion photography. So I shared a link to David Bailey's images in the chat. I also have a link in the show notes. I invite you to take a look. Google Arts and Culture has this amazing little mini website that tells you all about him, shows you a lot of his work, and also quite a bit of the progression of his career. So I invite you to take a look and appreciate this master's timeless images. They are just absolutely incredible, and I assure you, you will find some things that you will enjoy in there. So this week for Talent Under 30. Our Talent Under 30 photographer is based in Cleveland, Ohio. His name, Justin Gamble. Justin is, I would say it's fair to call him both extremely talented and also potentially an overachiever of, honestly, the most successful kind. In addition to being a very talented wedding and portrait photographer from Cleveland, Ohio, Justin also founded the largest community for creatives in Northeast Ohio. It's called Cleveland Creates. It was founded with the idea of a community of like-minded creatives set on building a more positive and engaged creative community through collaboration, networking, and education. On a monthly basis, they host a variety of networking, collaboration, education, and community building events. I had the good fortune of meeting Justin at the Pixel Photo Fest. Well, I guess it's about a year and a half ago now. It was in 2019, and it was an event that was put on by the Pixel Connection in Cleveland, Ohio. Actually, here's his Instagram for you. And I also had the opportunity while I was there to attend one of the events put on by his group, Cleveland Creates. The city of Cleveland is lucky to have talented and educated individuals like Cleveland, and I will tell you, or like Justin, excuse me. I will tell you they have an incredible creative community in Cleveland. I want you to remember his name. He's got a great future ahead of him. I have a link to both his website and his Instagram in the show notes. I'm going to take just a second here, and I'm going to give you those same links in the chat window. Let me just separate the URLs so you can actually use them. There we go. Awesome. Okay. And folks, you can help me out. Hold the door open for a younger photographer, please. If you know of an incredibly talented photographer of any genre, I don't care if they shoot landscapes, I don't care if they shoot wildlife, as long as they are under the age of 30 and they're creating exceptional work, please share his or her Instagram handle with me so that I can check them out and possibly feature them here on TOGCHAT. All right, let's dive in for some Q&A.
It's time for some problem solving. The TOGCHAT Q&A.
Cool. So actually, let me give you one little piece of information. You may have noticed that towards the end of Udi's interview, I was having a little side conversation in the chat there. Later this evening at, 10 p.m. Eastern time in the U.S., so 10 p.m. my time, 7 p.m. West Coast time, California, I'm going to be doing a presentation called The Art of Seeing for the professional photographers of Sacramento Valley. So this is basically a regional group of the larger group PPA, okay? Tonight is their annual open house. Obviously, they are doing it virtually, but they have got some prizes and contests that they're doing. They'll be announcing the winners of their photo competition that they hold. That's all starting at 6 p.m. their time, 9 p.m. my time, East Coast, okay? And then I will be presenting beginning at 10 o'clock Eastern time, 7 o'clock Pacific. And the presentation is 90 minutes, give or take. But they have some extra space, and it is free to attend. So if you would like to see this presentation and get a sense of all the different things that PPA groups do and the kind of activities that they're involved in and what the people are like, you can attend. So I'm putting the link in the chat window for you. I will not be putting the link in the show notes because the event happens tonight, right? So it's going to happen pretty much not long after this is over. So for those of you, maybe it's Thursday already, if you're in that part of the world, or even if you're just planning on staying up late tonight and you want to get a good dose of me, you can have an extra 90 minutes. The talk that I'm doing, it's actually a fun talk. It's called The Art of Seeing. It's actually about why we take crappy pictures, the science behind it. But science is only a part of the talk. And then we get into the solutions. How do we solve that problem? How do we improve on what we're doing and build our skill sets? So I've shared that with you. Maybe I'll see some of you there. Make sure when you register, it asks how you heard about it. Make sure you tell them that you heard about it on TOGCHAT, okay? All right, let me just get my notes back up here so I've got everything that I need. I had one question that came in early. So let's go ahead and pop that up there. And this is from Alvin. And his question is, how can you shoot with a long shutter speed to light paint behind your subject without a flash, keeping a person relatively sharp using only constant light? That's a great question, Alvin. So a lot of you have seen the videos that I have done with the Olympus Live composite where I've essentially drawn a background behind my subject. But indeed, I did use flash to light the subject, and then I used a constant light to draw the background. So Alvin, I'm kind of obligated to tell you that the easiest solution for doing what you want to do is to get an Olympus camera and use live composite. But short of going out and buying a new camera, really what we have to do here is let's break it down, right? So all good photography is about problem solving. So if you're going to use constant lights, both for your subject and for painting your background, if it were me, I would want to make sure that I have two different lights, at least, meaning I want one light or set of lights to light my subject as my primary light. And then I want the light that I am going to use for drawing the background. That's step one. Step two, and again, when I say lights, certainly you can go out and you can get nice lights from companies like Spiffy Gear, or you can use light bulbs or flashlights or anything, right? Problem solving. Remember that phrase. So step one, you want to have two separate lights. Then I'm going to put the camera on a tripod. Then I am going to set things up for a time exposure. And now there are two things that have to happen. One, I want to be able to turn off the ambient light in the room. That is going to be key to you making this work without a live composite type feature, Alvin. If you're able to turn off the ambient light, you're going to get things set up. You're going to pre-focus your shot, camera on the tripod. You will have your key lights on. You will open the shutter, allow the lights to stay on long enough, and obviously you're going to test this in advance for the right amount of time. You're going to allow the lights to stay on long enough to properly expose your subject, and then you're going to turn them off. Now you are in complete darkness. You're still telling your subject, sit still, don't move. Breathing, it's completely optional, but don't move. And then you are going to grab your second light, and you're going to run around, and you are going to paint your background. Now, I know already some of you, because you're Debbie Downers or whatever, are already being like, well, yeah, man, I'll do that, and I'll trip over everything. Problem solving. If this is the way you have to do it, no big deal. Go to a dollar store or a party store and buy a couple small packs of those little fluorescent light sticks that the kids have where you break the stick and it glows. Super simple. So before you start your shot, you grab 2 of those, crack them open and toss them on the floor. Obviously, you don't want a lot of them because you do not want them to light your subject. Toss them on the floor, and now you can see where you're walking. So the challenge, Alvin, is you're going to have a lot of trial and error to get it done. Now, trial and error is not a bad thing, but just means you're going to have to be patient. I would encourage you to be methodical, jot things down. How long are your exposures? What are your movements? All that kind of stuff. And work at it. I assure you, even when you have seen me do the live composite light painting for the backgrounds in my videos, or when you've seen the videos of me presenting like on stage at Photo Plus or WPPI where I've done that, I've spent the best part of a week prior to going to those events and getting on a stage in front of a couple hundred people practicing what is the movement that I'm going to do. What do I want that background to look like? How am I going to make it look neat? And then making sure that I'm also doing it in the most efficient way possible to get the best result. So it's not the kind of thing that you're gonna, sort it out in like 2 minutes and boom, you're gonna have a really cool shot. But yeah, if you're working with constant lights, you don't have live composite, you need to be able to turn off the ambient light completely, and you need to be able to turn off your key lights after you have gotten your primary exposure on your subject. That's my advice. All right. Okay, gang. So I got a couple other questions in here, but we got some time. So come on, folks. You're here tonight. How can I help you out? What can we do to improve your photography? I'm going to be pushy about that this year, right? I want to make a difference. So, first question I saw come in here, scrolling back up. Where are we at there? And from, actually, I think I missed one. I apologize. Mitch's, I thought there was a question that came in before Mitch. Let me just make sure. I don't want to upset anyone. No, it was Mitch. Okay, so Mitch had a question here. I'm thinking about a lockdown project where I take photos of people at their windows from outside, pre-arrangement, not creeping, and what are the pitfalls to avoid when shooting through windows? So a couple thoughts here, Mitch. Number one, good for you. I think your challenges, by no means am I discouraging it. I think it's awesome. I would challenge you to think the idea through a little bit more in the sense of what is it that you're trying to say about that, right? Having the people looking out the windows, etc. I think if you do that, that's going to guide you a little bit more in terms of how you're going to compose your images, what kind of lighting you're going to look for, maybe even for that matter, what kind of expressions you'll be looking for from people, etc. Okay, so I just think it's a good idea to have that as part of the plan. The only thing that comes to mind for me, I mean, you're probably going to want to work with a longer lens, especially if you're shooting in an urban area where you've got taller buildings and that type of thing. And I would encourage you to work with a polarizer, because the challenge that you're going to have if people are behind glass, if they're behind windows, depending on the angles, depending on the time of day, etc., you're very, very likely going to run into all kinds of situations with reflections. Now, as long as you're looking for opportunities, those reflections could create some very cool creative opportunities sometimes, but they're not going to all the time, right? So that's kind of the real challenge there is making sure that you are, kind of prepared in the idea that, hey, this looks really cool, but you pick up your camera and look and you realize, all you're seeing is the white wall of the building across the street that's reflected in the window. The polarizer is going to allow you to deal with that and still get the shot that you want. That, off the top of my head, that's the biggest piece of advice that I would give you. Okay, and actually Mitch just gave me a follow-up here, so let me grab this. He said, I want it to reflect the situation, our third lockdown, so it will be a sense of longing and being almost captive. It's early stages, though, much more thought needed. Yeah, and Mitch, it's worth pointing out. So that's good, though. You've got kind of the catalyst down pat. Sometimes in scenarios like that, especially going back to my days working in photojournalism, sometimes you just have to start shooting your idea and kind of flush it out, right? So by getting out there and seeing what you can see, seeing what you can photograph and what kind of angles you're getting and just kind of how it starts to come together. So certainly you don't want to like say, okay, I'm going to shoot for a week and go shoot for a week and then come back and throw all your stuff on a computer and kind of figure out, well, what's my story like? What's my hook? I would not recommend that at all. But I would say, yes, go out, start shooting, get a day or two of shooting in, start looking at stuff and kind of see what is it you're gravitating to? What are the things that are really kind of jumping out at you? And that starts to give you kind of a focus, right? And you're going to have to be flexible on a subject like this because it's going to be really hard to, if you go out with too much of a preconceived notion of what these images are going to look like, it's going to really hard to make that happen kind of in the real world type setting. So yeah, I would suggest that you're off to a good start with what you're thinking about. Okay. All right. Now I want to scroll back on up there. I had another one that I saw from Kevin. Joe, last week you emphasized learning fundamentals. Yeah, it's pretty much every week. Example being the inverse square law. What other fundamentals do you recommend for early stage photographers? So Kevin, there's actually, it's a fairly short list, but it's not like you learn them in 10 minutes, right? But it's a short list of things that are really the most important foundational elements of being able to make consistently great photos. And I would put them in this priority order, not in terms of what's more important, but in terms of what order you should be concentrating on learning them. First and foremost is going to be exposure and exposure controls. Now you notice, folks, I'm leaving out a word or a phrase that you commonly hear when we talk about this, and that is this exposure triangle thing. So let me just switch my screen real quick. I'm going to share the link to it. I'm going to tell you this for now. I'm not going to give you all the details. The exposure triangle is a bunch of crap. It is pointless. It is ridiculous. It is a memory trick. That's a fact. That is not Joe's opinion. Memory tricks do not teach you things, and they do not teach you how to understand relationships between things. They just teach you how to remember things. Ironically, if we were to go to Google, type in the exposure triangle, click on the images tab, and look at all the various diagrams of the exposure triangle that comes up, most of them, that's not fair, probably 60 to 70% of them actually do it wrong and do not even attempt to show the relationships between the three sides. When the exposure triangle is done properly, it attempts to show the relationships, but only in a way for you to remember what they are, to like be able to repeat them, not to actually be able to do them, to be able to use them. That's the problem. So I will give you a little bit of help here. Next week, February 4th. So that's next Thursday, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I will be doing a class, and it's free. It's called Exposure. What is correct exposure? Sign up, take it. You will learn a lot about what I'm talking about with regards to not memorizing things, but actually understanding the relationships. And folks, you do. You have to get to the point where you truly understand the relationships between shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, which isn't a thing anymore unless you're shooting film. Even though our cameras say ISO, even though we have an ISO setting, there really is no such thing. ISO is gain. That's all it is. It's gain. And some of you I know are like, what the heck is he talking about? Attend the presentation and you will understand. So after you've got that relationship down, Kevin, of shutter speed, aperture, ISO, that rolls very conveniently into depth of field and making sure that you understand what depth of field really is. Understand that there is actually a field in depth of field, not a field with green things growing, unless that's what you're photographing. But there is a field. Understanding how you control and manipulate depth of field. And of course, it goes without saying, making sure that you understand, like actually understand, that depth of field is not a blurry background. Hugo Lopez, I got a question for you, man. Why the hell should I shout you out? Give me a good reason, man. Come on. Like, that's like the dumbest thing I've seen all day today. Thank you for that. Seriously. Anyway, Kevin, we've got inverse square law is the third. That's the last one, right? So we started out exposure relationships. Now we've got depth of field, and then it's the inverse square law. And understand that the inverse square law applies LED lighting, any kind of constant lighting, strobe lighting, and natural lighting. Anywhere there's light, there is the inverse square law, right? There just is. So if you're looking for fundamentals, Kevin, that would be the place to start. Okay? All right, here we go. So Scrolling on down here, and we're in good shape time-wise, gang. I saw a couple more questions come in, but go for it. We can answer your questions tonight. So here from Victor. How the sun CRI is changed in different weather conditions, harsh, noon, sun, golden hours, blue hours, different reasons. Well, so realistically, Victor, the sun CRI is not changed other than the sense that you've got atmospheric issues that are happening there. So CRI, and Victor, I will tell you, and I'll tell you the rest of you, make sure you listen to the rest of the interview with Udi, because he's gonna talk about that. Essentially, the CRI is the CRI. It's pure, period. So when you start talking about golden hour, when you start talking about blue hour, and those types of things, the CRI is still 100. It's pure. However, the color temperature is changing. That is different from CRI. So that's what you need to understand. Listen to the rest of the interview, and we actually get into that. We break that down and discuss how that plays out. But I assure you, CRI, if it's 100, it's 100. If you go out and buy a light and it has a CRI of 94 or 95, doesn't matter what you do, it's still 94 or 95. Even if you put a red gel over that light, it still has a CRI of 94, 95. Because CRI is not color temperature. So what you're referring to there is actually color temperature. That's the difference, okay? All right. Let's see. Mr. Pictures 1. I love David Bailey, and I follow him on Instagram. Yes. Fun fact, the movie Blow Up was indeed based on his life. Yeah, his work is incredible. And I'm trying to think of a politically correct way to say this. I mean, you can imagine, he's in his 80s at this point, and the man has had what is, it is an understatement to call it an iconic career. But you should, while you're Googling, click on links for some of the interviews that he's done, or read some of the transcripts of some of his interviews. He's pretty hysterical. He's kind of a no BS kind of guy. You guys think that I'm kind of straightforward and brutal. He makes me look like a pussycat, big time. Okay, so yeah, he's definitely an awesome guy. Dwayne, I came back to the game at 52. I love you pumping up the youngins, but old guys need love too. Why do people care about what you pay for gear? I think gear matters, all things equal. Agree? Yes, no? Well, Dwayne, so there's a couple things there. You actually have a lot to unpack in that. I obviously try to pump up all photographers. I highlight the iconic photographers through the photo quote. Like the photo quote, I don't care about the quote. That's Kevin. Thank you so much for the super chat. I don't really care about the quote. I'm, trying to get people to kind of expand their horizons and see some truly iconic imagery and also learn a little bit about what it took to get to that point. And then for younger photographers, it's honestly just kind of create awareness that so many of the things that my generation and the generation under me will talk about and complain about photographically, like, oh, presets, oh, filters, yeah, I hate presets and filters, especially like the Instagram stuff. I hate that. But you know what? I'm an old guy. The fact of the matter is, younger generation loves that stuff. And on top of that, the younger generation is doing some really cool stuff. So who am I to say, right? And I made a commitment to myself a little while back. I mean, I've always supported younger photographers because I had photographers that supported me when I was young. But I made a commitment a little while back in the middle of pandemic when I had a few extra minutes to really start looking at the work of younger photographers. And literally, it started out one day just thinking about some of my previous interns, a few of which you've seen bits and pieces of, and you will see some more as we go on. And I found myself being incredibly surprised, actually. Now, that sounds like really mean or bad for my interns. No, what I mean is I'm familiar with their work. I know what they do. But I don't look at their work that often. And in fact, several of them, I hadn't looked at their work really in a couple of years, right? So I started going through their work, and honestly, I was blown away. And indeed, there were pieces of their work that I was like, I'm just not into that stuff. But then as I started to really kind of look at everything they were doing and kind of their style and the way it had developed and approached, I realized, like, you know what? It's not my thing, but it's actually really cool. So for me, I'm actually learning a lot from these younger photographers. You guys frequently ask me about, creativity. Where do you come up with all the ideas, Joe? And I openly admit that at this point in my life and my career, it's harder to come up with ideas that are truly unique and original because I've been doing it for so long. So there's this been there, done that thing that I have to get past every time. Looking at what the younger generation is doing is inspiring and really gets me energized and gets ideas floating because it's forcing me to look at things differently. So, so that's that piece. I think there's a lot of value to being able to, kind of open up your mind and absorb those things. That doesn't mean you have to change what you're doing. Not at all. Okay. And you shouldn't change what you're doing. It's not about keeping up or even being ahead of. It's just about appreciating that there are many different ways to be creative and people have many different styles, right? Now, as far as why do people care about, what you pay for gear and all that stuff, just people are like that. I mean, it's no different than with cars. For me, a car is basic transportation. I like it if it at least looks nice, but I'm not going to spend extra money for it to be super fast or to look super cool. I'm just not that kind of person. But there are certainly people that, are going to spend crazy amounts of money for the car to look cool, for the car to be loud, for the car to be all souped up and have heavy duty engine. So it's just, you'll always have this. And obviously once you spent the money on a car or on a camera, you don't want to feel like you made a bad purchase, right? So even in a social peer pressure kind of sense, it's like, mine's better than, I made the right choice. Nobody wants to find out they made the wrong choice, right? So I think that's where a lot of that comes from. All right, Joe's Photography. With new camera coming out and their software getting better, why would you ever want to switch out of the auto mode version of the camera matter mode? So, Joe, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me there. That sentence doesn't actually make sense, but I'm assuming you just mean with everything getting better, why would we not use auto? Because auto is getting better, but it's not the best. Auto can't understand what I'm trying to create, period. That's just lazy, Joe. It's not even a thing. For average picture taking, is auto going to do a good job pretty consistently? Yeah, absolutely. But I know for a fact, Joe, in your case, like, you're trying to do studio work with lighting and all that kind of stuff. Auto ain't going to cut it, pal. It's just not. You got to stop cutting corners, right? You're never going to get me to encourage a photographer to cut corners. You know that, Joe, because you're here every week, right? Not going to happen. So, all right, let's see here. And scrolling on down. I didn't get another response from Hugo. I guess he didn't like the way I called him out. So, yeah, Hugo, that shit doesn't fly with me, man. Come here, you want to learn something, participate. I'm all for it, man. I will jump through hoops to help you. But you want me to promote you or whatever? It's like, dude, take a hike, go somewhere else. Sorry, man. Okay. Victor, is it possible to be a good photographer without becoming a professional? Oh my God, yes. Those two things are not, mutually tied together. Not at all. I know plenty of photographers that I'm extremely jealous of for their talent, for their ability. But they work day jobs and in fact, actually, very specifically, I know a whole bunch of photographers out in Seattle, Washington area. They work for Microsoft and Apple. And then these guys are like, their portfolios, like their Flickr profiles and that kind of stuff, are to die for. But they also have day jobs making crazy money. They're not about to leave those day jobs. Photography is their hobby. It's their escape. It's their release. And they're amazing. So, and the thing of it is I would argue that their work is every bit as good as a professional and that their behavior is every bit at a professional level, but they don't make money, and that's cool. Nothing says that you have to do that. So Adam, congrats on continuing as a visionary. Thanks, sir. I appreciate it. For those of you that don't know what that means, obviously with the sale of Olympus to JIP, the new company is now called OMD Digital Solutions. We're still waiting to hear exactly what the brand name is going to be called. I honestly don't think we're going to hear that until much later this year, but I don't know. I literally don't know. So obviously there was some question / concern over what are they going to do with brand ambassadors? How many will there be? Will we still, have that opportunity? So, yes, very excited. Finally, kind of an exhale this week. I did get the phone call and the notification, and I think for the most part, I don't know for a fact, but I think for the most part here in the U.S., our visionary team is staying intact. And so I, get to spend another year representing the company, and hopefully by this summer, I'm going to be doing some traveling. I've already in the process over the last couple of days working to schedule some travel and in-person events later this year. I'll tell you straight up, I kind of got mixed feelings about it. I'm a little concerned. I want to make sure that I have my vaccination before I do that. But I'm, being optimistic that by the end of the year, we are able to get to a point where, we can get back to doing some in-person stuff. I think it's still going to involve masks. I think it's still going to involve a little bit of discipline, but it will be great to be able to, get back out and get in front of people and teach in person. So hopefully soon, working on a trip in August to North Carolina for the Carolina Photo Expo, and in July, possibly down to Austin, Texas, to one of the most amazing camera stores that I've ever been in, and that's Precision Camera in Austin. Been down there a couple times, and totally looking forward to the opportunity to be able to get back down there again. Okay. All right. From, let's see, Charles. Joe, I enjoyed watching on the Rob Trek online meetup this past weekend. Thank you. So actually, what he is referring to, let me grab the link here and I'll share with you guys. This past Sunday morning, and if you follow me on social, you would have seen my posts about it. I participated in a Micro Four Thirds online meetup, which included, honestly, a group of photographers that I'm just simply really honored to be a part of. It was myself, Emery Lowry, who does Micro Four Nerds, Jimmy Chang from London, Maddie Solentano, Peter Forsgaard, Robin Wong, and of course Rob Trek, who hosted it. So I'll put that link in there. If you guys want to check it out, you can. It was a great conversation with Micro Four Thirds shooters from all around the world about, honestly, the future of Micro Four Thirds in general, where we see photography going. So I don't want to make you think, hey, check it out, you're going to learn a whole bunch of cool new stuff. No, there's no big secrets, none of that kind of stuff. It was just, it was actually just a nice, realistic conversation about photography and what, could potentially happen with, all the things that we're dealing with. So anyway, let's see here. Next up, what did I have? And Alvin, Joe's photography. Can you get a piece of paper, fill your frame, and take a picture, and then repeat with a white piece? Oh, that's why you don't use auto. Okay, sorry. I get it. Yep. Yeah, I mean, guys, look, you guys hear me say all the time, I am a huge fan of everything that is happening with the technology. I talked before about, of my generation. So many people in my generation, they hate change. They talk, oh, it was better when I was a kid. It's the old, sure, I used to have to walk uphill both ways to school, that kind of thing. Nah, I love change. I love the fact that this technology is so amazing. But at the end of the day, and this goes all the way back to Kevin's question about, what type of fundamentals. At the end of the day, technology is only going to be able to take us so far, because until we get to the point, which, folks, it's not going to happen in our lifetimes, until we get to the point where they're implanting computer chips in our brains, where computer devices are able to, understand our thought processes and our thought waves and even potentially see what we see, until we get to that point, you still have a disconnect where the camera is a tool. Today's cameras are computers that do amazing things. They simplify our tasks and our job incredibly compared to 25 years ago. But they are still not capable of understanding what we see and what we imagine. That's the disconnect. So by that simple guideline there, that means that the cameras are susceptible to making errors because there's a disconnect in that communication. So the way you get around that, the way you the way that you succeed is by learning the fundamentals, understanding the basics. You're never going to completely allow the camera to do all the work. It's still your responsibility. And gang, I hate to tell you, any amazing photographer that I've ever met of any generation, they're control freaks. They are not interested in setting a camera on auto and just kind of kicking back and letting things happen. Nah, not at all. Okay. Let's see. Dwayne, never saw a black photographer, degrees in journalism and PR, but I decided to go with writing versus photos. Left Sony, went to Leica, and people made comments. Why you love those tools, glasses, what matters. Yeah, I'm one of those people that make comments about Leica, but hey, man, if you like Leica, then, good for you. I'm not a fan of their cameras. Leicas today are not like Leicas back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It's a completely different monster. Optics, yes, their optics are incredible. I do appreciate the fact that my cameras do have a lot of these more modern features that do things for me. Like I just said, I can't ignore the camera and just let it do its thing, but I love the fact that the camera has convenience built in. Leica cameras just don't have a lot of the conveniences that I want, and I'm not a big fan of the ergonomics. So at the end of the day, Dwayne, if the ergonomics work for you and you can afford the price and all that, that's awesome. So don't let anybody tell you that it's a bad choice or whatever. But, at the same time, I know that nobody tonight said it was a problem. So it kind of seems almost like you got a little bit of a chip on your shoulder over it. And that's exactly what I was describing. You've got a lot of money invested in that Leica. So obviously you don't want somebody telling you it's a piece of crap, right? So we could sit here and we could debate the merits of Leica and this and that and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's strictly your opinion because you're the one using it. That's all that really matters. So, okay. All right, gang. So where are we at here? We are at 7:08, and I need to go, and I need to prep for the talk that I'm doing tonight. So one more time, let me grab the link for those of you, if you're not going to bed, and if you're going to be up, and if you are curious to see a little bit of what the regional versions of PPA are all about, I am going to be presenting for night for the professional photographers of Sacramento Valley, which is California. I'm on the East Coast, Pennsylvania. But I'll be presenting for them virtually. Tonight is their annual open house. They'll be announcing contest winners and contest judging. They've got a whole bunch of stuff going on, even some giveaways and some prizes, stuff like that. And I'll be doing a 90-minute presentation that is actually a little bit more than 90 minutes. They just don't know that yet. It's okay. It's a 90-minute presentation called The Art of Seeing. And in short, it's about why we take really crappy pictures, the science behind why we take really crappy pictures, and a lot about kind of how to fix that and how to get past that. So I need to go and take care of a couple things, get set up for that. You guys need to go take some pictures, right? That's the drill. So I do want to thank you for being here tonight. That pretty much wraps it up. So great questions, by the way, tonight too, folks. Really, really, really appreciate that. Kimberly's still here. I thought she would have left by now. Okay, now they know I'm going to go a little over 90 minutes, but that's okay. So listen, gang, thank you for tuning in. As always, thanks for a great night of chatting about all things photography. Don't forget to download the podcast. Hear the rest of my interview with Spiffy Gear's Udi Tirosh. Hope to see you again next Wednesday. And in the meanwhile, stay safe, stay healthy, and of course, whatever you do, gang, please remember these words. Thanks for watching this episode of TOGCHAT. Don't forget to download this week's podcast for even more TOG knowledge. The link is in the show notes. Now go and pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios.